is our real enemy. We've got to build carriers and send them to the Chinese. Well, it's very hard for the Republicans to say, okay, we're redeploying from the Middle East to East Asia. That's a simple argument, and it's one that goes to the grain of what Republicans have been saying for quite some time. So I think that's the real shifting that we're seeing.
نيكولاس، بنتابع حوارنا. بدنا نبقى هلا مع فقره زاب بتجولة على شاشه العالم، وبعد الفاصل بنعود لنحكي عن وضع اوباما بالسنه الاخيره للانتخابات.
It's been generally accepted for some time that too much red meat isn't good for our health. This American study suggests the risks may be even greater than previously thought. Scientists looked at the data for over 120,000 people over a number of years. They found that eating an extra portion of red meat every day increased the risk of death by 13%. Eating an extra portion of processed meat every day increased the risk of death by 20%.
Hours after queuing, this man was one of the first anywhere in the entire world to get his hands on the new model, which has all sorts of improvements like a better screen, higher resolution, also a better camera and a faster processor. There were some similar scenes in Tokyo where hundreds put up with freezing temperatures in the Japanese capital as they waited for the shop to open, and in Hong Kong, queues formed throughout the course of the night. Come morning, as staffers lifted the shutters while cheering broke out among many of the people in line, and some of them
نذكر الناس اللي جاي من باب عمر، من حمص، من باب السباع، من جبل الزاوي، على مبدأ رغيف الخبز عم نقسمه بالنص بس عشان طعمه الناس المنكوبة من القصف والضرب والشو اسمه قبل بشار الأسد.
بجمع مواد غذائية وتوزيعها على عائلات منكوبة يساهم التجار أيضا. يقول سوريون إن العنف الذي يمارسه النظام والحرب الطائفية التي يلوح بها لم تنل من وحدتهم بل زادتهم تماسكا.
At another camp, we watched a new family arriving, straight from the border. It's so hard, he told us. We walked for 6 hours, all the time risking our lives. Then they're ushered into their new world, safe but restricted. The man who organised their escape, himself a refugee, showed me video he'd shot on his phone of their journey to the border.
The soldiers come into the villages, and every boy as young as 15 is a suspect. No one can survive when the army is around. Crossing the river is almost impossible now. We had to cut down trees and lay them across the river, tying them with ropes.
Journeys like this are being made many times over now. Assyrians who oppose President Assad in this northwestern corner of the country realise that they cannot stay.
It is a song for the revolution, but their dream of a free Syria seems further away than ever as more families are forced to flee the country. They bring with them frightening accounts of human rights abuses. Musa is just 14 years old. He tells me he was arrested and tortured because his family are Sunni Muslims.
I was tied up and stretched. They hit me with sticks and cables. I now have flashbacks and nightmares.
Abdallah El-Senoussi, l'ancien bras droit du guide libyen déchu, a été arrêté à l'aéroport de Nouakchott dans la nuit de vendredi à samedi. Selon les services de sécurité mauritaniens, il arrivait de Casablanca sur un vol régulier et était en possession d'un passeport malien falsifié. Âgé de 62 ans, il était l'ancien chef des renseignements militaires, l'un des organes de répression les plus puissants et efficaces du régime. Al-Senoussi est sous le coup d'un mandat d'arrêt de la Cour pénale internationale depuis le 27 juin 2011. Il est accusé de crimes contre l'humanité lors de la révolution libyenne.
It is by all means the end of the rope here.
The end of the road?
The end of the rope. The end rope. There is nobody can afford such luxuries anymore, if you can call it luxury.
Does that mean your relationship with the United States is at the end of the rope?
This form of activity, this behavior cannot be tolerated. It's past the time.
But you cannot fight the Taliban on your own, sir, with your own forces.
No, we can definitely do that.
Largement partagées sur Internet, ces images amateurs ont particulièrement choqué en Tunisie. Sur le toit de la principale université du pays, un manifestant salafiste remplace le drapeau national par le fanion de l'islam radical. Une jeune étudiante tente de l'en empêcher, Elle est violemment repoussée. Rapidement, cet acte propulse Raoula, élève en master de français, au rang de symbole du face-à-face entre religieux et militants de gauche en Tunisie. Quelques jours plus tard, elle est invitée au palais présidentiel de Carthage. Souvent taxé de laxisme face aux salafistes, le président de la République tient cette fois à marquer le coup et condamne l'atteinte au drapeau national.
Toute agression contre ce drapeau est une agression contre l'unité nationale. Ce ne sont pas les extrémistes d'une tendance ou d'une autre qui vont décider de notre futur.
En direct à la télévision nationale, le président de la République remet ensuite une médaille du mérite à Raoula. Monsef Marzouki félicite également une autre étudiante pour son courage face aux salafistes.
He and his father have been arrested after being warned not to cross a police line at a protest outside the Sudanese embassy in Washington. Clooney was among hundreds of protesters who accused Khartoum of provoking a humanitarian crisis on the border region with South Sudan.
We're here really to ask two very simple questions. The first question is something immediate, and immediately we need humanitarian aid to be allowed into the Sudan before it becomes the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, immediately. The second thing we are here to ask, it's a very simple thing, is for the government in Khartoum to stop randomly killing its own innocent men, women, and children. Stop raping them and stop starving them. That's all we ask.
Pour Amina, mais ces Marocains veulent faire changer la loi pour épargner d'autres jeunes filles. Ce samedi à Rabat, environ 200 militants des droits de la femme se sont rassemblés devant le Parlement pour réclamer justice.
C'est un cri de la société pour changer cette loi qui autorise le viol et qui oblige une fille violée à se marier avec son agresseur.
Amina Al-Filali, 16 ans, a été contrainte d'épouser l'homme qui l'a violée pour échapper au déshonneur. Sa famille a évité la disgrâce, mais 6 mois après ce mariage forcé, Amina s'est suicidée en absorbant de la mort au rat. Son geste a ému le pays. Depuis la divulgation de la nouvelle, mercredi dernier, les appels se multiplient pour réformer cette loi qui protège les criminels plus que les victimes. Si le mariage est accepté par les parents de la jeune fille violée, l'agresseur n'est plus poursuivi par la justice.
عودة لمتابعة الفقرة الأخيرة من ترانزيت. نيكولاس، الانتخابات الأمريكية يعني رياح هذه الانتخابات تجري لصالح من هذه الأيام؟
Say the question.
لصالح من هالانتخابات؟ الرياح تجري لصالح من؟
It's far too early. We're at the beginning of the process, really, of the elections in the U.S.
بس في ناحية يعني من الموضوع الاقتصادي، المالي، السياسي.
It's argued that the economy is changing the outcome of the elections right now, but that is a patently ridiculous argument because we are so far out from the elections. And as you know, anything can happen. Remember in 2008, the last elections that we had between McCain and Obama, the financial crisis hit in September 2008. A huge blow to the Republican arguments and to the Bush legacy arguments and to people like McCain who seemed as if they didn't have the experience to deal with this critical issue. So we could be seeing, one example is in the realm of foreign policy, of course. It's discussed that the Israelis may launch a strike against the Iranians before the elections. That's a big game-changing moment, and there's a lot of those that are left. So to talk about trends right now is going to be very difficult. I think one trend that we've seen is if these candidates, if one of these three is indeed the nominee, but even this is subject to question right now, but if these three are the nominee, a lot can happen, but I think that at its core, the candidates on the Republican side are fairly weak. They're fairly weak. The primary process and the fight between the Republicans, I think, has gone far beyond and been far more damaging than the fight between Obama and Hillary Clinton that we'll remember.
يعني هون عم يستفيد أوباما من هاي المعركة الجمهورية؟
He is taking advantage of it in a classic Obama way, which is leading from behind, which is he's just stepping back and he's letting them fight it out. And every once in a while, he comes in with a little wedge, a little tick, a little joke, for example, to make light of it, but also to be serious on it. So there's a big debate. I think you know, when I talk to friends here in Lebanon or in other parts of the Middle East, they're sometimes surprised at many of the same debates that are happening in Tunisia, in Egypt, about, for example, women's rights and women's reproductive rights and women's bodies. These arguments, in very similar lines, though not completely, are happening in America. The Democrats are arguing that there is a war on women going on right now over abortion, the right to contraception, health care, also a whole host of issues. One issue is, for example, the idea that Obama, the first legislation he signed into law was equal pay for equal work, that women and men by federal law must be paid the same. There's an attempt by the Republicans to roll back this initiative. So we're having these debates right now, and Obama is very skillfully stepping back, but every once in a while is making a serious point about the subjects that the Republicans are talking about. It has had the effect of making the Republican candidates much more extreme than they really, I think, ever have been in a former primary. And that's partially because I think the Republican base has turned more radical, more extreme in many ways than in previous Republican nomination fights. The country as a whole, in some ways, has turned more extreme, actually on both sides in some ways. And Obama is certainly more than happy to sit back and let them go further, go more extreme, especially when the candidate that's supposed to go up against Obama is Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, at the end of the day, he was governor for a bit in Massachusetts, was a moderate, almost liberal, northeastern Republican, right? He now seems as if he's running in the red state of Oklahoma to the right of the whole Republican Party. He wants to run to the right of the other candidates. This is not genuine. It doesn't make sense. Obama, who seems very authentic, no matter what problems you may have, is going to be running against people that are either very authentic but very extreme, or trying to be moderate and not be authentic anymore because they tried to be so extreme. This is the Romney example.
نيكولاس، يعني كمان في مشهد هيك كان أخذ كتير حيز بالصحافة ونحكى عنه كتير، وبعده لهلأ الأصداء عم تحكي عنه، زيارة نتنياهو ولقاء الرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما. واضح أنه تصاعدت أصوات اللي غير صديقة لإسرائيل بالصحافة، ومنها على سبيل المثال بالنيوزويك هذا المقال فريند انمي، يعني الأصدقاء الأعداء بين نتنياهو وأوباما، اللي يعني يبدو أنه هاي الخطوة هي الخطوة بتقول أنه أصدقاء إسرائيل ولكن ليس أصدقاء إسرائيل نتنياهو، بمعنى إسرائيل نتنياهو اليوم هي غير شعبية، غير أصدقاء إسرائيل. قديش يعني هيدا اللقاء بعد عم ياخد حيز بالنقاشات، وشو اللي بالنهاية توصل له هذا اللقاء عمليا؟ هل هو تأجيل الضربة أو وعد بتأجيل الضربة مقابل أصوات اليهود بأمريكا لأوباما؟
I think, you know, for all of the analysis that you often see and the talk in the Middle East about America being totally subservient to AIPAC and the Israeli lobby, and sometimes very crudely, unfortunately, it's put as the Jewish lobby, which it's not. I think that what we saw and what we're seeing now is a much more wide open, honest debate and discussion going on about the benefits of the relationship between the US and Israel, the quality of the relationship, how it's being conducted, precisely because Netanyahu and his allies have really staked out a very hardline and extreme, some argue even an anti-Obama position in so many different forums, that it's starting to provoke a real backlash, such that I really don't think we've seen in the US in quite some time. So it's positive that these issues are being debated really for the first time in multiple platforms, social media, on the mainstream media like Newsweek and Time, and even on late night talk shows. I mean, Jon Stewart's Daily Show is one of the most popular shows in America. It's where, you know, a large degree of young people get their news from. It's from a political comedy program. And Jon Stewart has been tougher on the Israelis and Netanyahu, he's Jewish himself, than I think a lot of the mainstream media has been. And this is popular stuff. So it's getting into the American discourse. It's also getting into the discourse because people recognize and are starting to finally recognize, as they have on Syria, but more with Iran, that another war in the Middle East is something that America is going to not only have to think very hard about, but it's going to have consequences that are far greater than we've had before. And so we're seeing a debate finally.
نيكولاس شكرا لك، شكرا لوجودك معنا بترانزيت. مشاهدينا بالختام ذكروا لما تطفوا الشاشة الأحداث ما بتوقف. ترانزيت الأسبوع المقبل نفس الشاشة نفس الوقت.